What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the show. This is Competitive Matchups. If you guys like the show, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right below. If you guys want to get notified, hit that notification button so every time I come up with a video, you guys know what drops. You guys can tune in. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to kick off an epic battle. Wide receiver versus a corner once again. But this is the greatest of all time. This is Jerry Rice versus Deion Primetime Sanders. Let's go. Primetime, aka Deion, was a phenomenal athlete at Florida State. He went on to play football and start in track. He was basically one of those athletes that he can pretty much play anything. He can play on the offensive side of the ball. He can play on the defense side of the ball. He can also go back and catch some punt returns and kickoff returns. It's just so valuable, and you really don't see that in today's athletes. And you have to really think about who was the last two-sport athletes to go out there and compete in two sports. I mean, you have to include Deion in all of those discussions because you have to think about going back into the early and mid 90s, he was the only one doing this two-sport thing. And you're going to professional sports and you're out there competing and you're out there, in the limelight and you're playing two sports. And when you're playing two sports, I can just imagine the fatigue on your body and the fatigue that just wears you down over the time. And this guy was able to do it in his prime. He was able to do it when football was at an all-time high, when the 49ers and Cowboys were rivals, and he was just one of the main focal points of those rivalries because he's one of the best players. And for him to go back and play baseball with the Atlanta Braves and the San Francisco Giants and other ball clubs, it just really shows what type of mindset this athlete had. And what he had was a professional mindset. This dude can really step up to the plate and get the job done. If it's on the football field, if it's on the baseball diamond, this dude always had his personality going. He really never showed you. He would show you frustration from time to time, but Deion was the type of guy that you gather towards, and people want to be next to Deion because he's funny. He has just one of those personalities that you just love to be around. And so this athlete of all time, and Deion Sanders, one of the greatest of all time, he always gets overlooked because he plays the defensive back position. And people of either fans or just people in general, I believe, don't take, or I think they look over the defensive back just in general because it is defense. It's not an offensive side. It's not an offense position that you can go ahead and point out and say, you know what, that's the best player, or that's the player that led them to the all-time victory. So defensive players are always going to be overlooked because of how the way the game is played and how the way the game is played in the air. And going against you can almost say the greatest of all time player, matched up with Deion today is just one of those matchups that I just thought about, and this is probably the best matchup I can ever come up with when Deion Sanders versus Jerry Rice. I mean, you can't get any better than this. These are two polarizing athletes, like I just mentioned, and you will just have to just embrace what you're seeing on the football field. Embrace what you're seeing on your television screen, because this doesn't really happen all the time. This is generational type of players. And when you have generation type of players like this, they can do wonders for you. I mean, they can make you excited. They can make you get jobs. They can make you expand your career if you're an NFL coach. But when you're talking about Jerry Rice is one of those athletes and one of those wide receivers that has some of the greatest hands of all time. The size of his hands, the way he can receive the ball, the way he can catch the ball at every angle was just one of a kind. His 40-yard dash coming into the NFL was the biggest question mark about Jerry Rice. Importantly, running 4.6s and 4.7s. And if you know about anything about football and anything about the wide receiver position, you will know that's on the slower side. It's not a 4.4, which is usually what they're accustomed to running. There isn't pretty much an average speed. So when you're running 4.6 and you're running 4.7, these are going to be question marks that the scouts and head coaches and general managers are always going to be asking, is this guy fast enough to play in the NFL? Luckily, for Jerry Rice, he was actually scouted and he was looked so heavily upon one of the greatest coaches of all time, and Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh recognized Jerry Rice's speed, and it's a difference between game speed. It's a difference between if you're running your 40-yard dash. So when you're running your 40-yard dash, you can display some really good speed, but when you are not a 40-yard type of guy and you don't really perform well under the clock, you can also depend on your game film, and that's what Jerry Rice was able to do. Jerry was able to go ahead and display what he was able to do on the football field on his film, and that's how he got recognized for the San Francisco 49ers to go ahead and draft him in 1985. When Deion Sanders was able to join the 49ers in 1994, it was one of the greatest defenses that ever played in San Francisco history. Not to mention, they had Steve Young and Jerry Rice on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you can just imagine the talent the 1994 49ers had on the football field was the reason why the NFL went to a salary cap. The Niners were paying dudes left and right, and they were the last team to actually do it. So going back to Deion Sanders joining the 49ers, and probably took his career off. He was able to win Defensive Player of the Year that year, and I believe Deion Sanders as a whole was probably the most valuable San Francisco 49ers in that Super Bowl run, and how they were able to beat the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game had to do a lot with Deion Sanders locking up Michael Irvin on the field. When Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, they were able to go to San Francisco the previous year and actually win in San Francisco and go on to beat the Bills in a Super Bowl. It was always the 1990s Cowboys and the 1990s 49ers pretty much going at it. And when they had Deion was able to come to San Francisco, it was a match in heaven. And Deion was able to lock up the opponent's number one wide receiver. And so when you go back to this matchup, Deion versus Jerry Rice, one of the all-time greats, you have to mention the value of Deion Sanders. Because the value of Deion Sanders, it's a little bit more, and I think it's a little bit complex when you're actually thinking about who was actually better or who was actually valuable. And when I actually broke this down, I thought about who was actually more valuable. And for me, the most valuable player out of these two, for me, I would have to say Deion Sanders is actually more valuable, because what I'm able to do, I can have a defensive player, cornerback, play on any side of the field to match up with your number one, and I can have my player go back on punt return the punts, and return the kicks. So Deion Sanders as a whole football player might be more valuable, but the better player, if you're choosing the better player, if you want to go by stats, and if you want to go by longevity, and if you want to go by consistency, Jerry Rice is probably one of the most consistent players in NFL history, going by his stats alone. I mean, you can say you can make an argument his best player that was thrown to him was Joe Montana. Yes. He can make an argument if we had one of the best quarterbacks in Steve Young. Yes. But at the end of the day, Jerry was able to showcase what he can do on the football field, and you can always see it through film. You can always go to YouTube and go ahead and search Jerry Rice, and you can see number 80 running routes, running by people, catching touchdown, and holding up the Lombardi Trophy. This guy had what it takes to be a modern athlete in today's game. And so if you put Jerry Rice in today's game, he would have insane numbers. And a lot of people play fantasy football like myself. I would be drafting Jerry Rice number one every single time. It wouldn't be Christian McCaffrey. It wouldn't be Ezekiel Elliott. It wouldn't be somebody like Lamar Jackson. It would be Jerry Rice every single time, every single year. So the value of Jerry versus Deion Sanders is going to be a little different. And it really comes down to what you like and what you can actually, go ahead and bring to the table. Like I said, if it was me coming from a defensive mind, yes, I play quarterback, yes, I play corner, but for me, the most valuable player, I would have to say Deion Sanders. But if I'm talking about the best player, if I want the best player overall, if you combine every stat and everything all together, I would have to say Jerry Rice is the better player out of these two. He is the GOAT. He is recognized as one of the greatest players of all time. So this competitive matchup of this week is two all-time greats in Deion Sanders and Jerry Rice, and we break it down. And I want to get into what the people actually said out there. I put the vote out there. I put it on Instagram. I put it on Twitter and put it on Facebook. And when people were actually voting, they were saying, who was the I put the question, who was the better player, Deion or Jerry? I actually put the other question, like, who was more valuable. I can see a lot of people leaning towards Deion Sanders because they were thinking about the value of a corner and the value of a punt returner and a valuable player as a kick returner as a whole might be more valuable than just a wide receiver. But it's not just a wide receiver you're looking at, and you're going against the best receiver to ever lace him up and arguably the best player to ever lace them up. So when we taking that in consideration, and when people are actually voting on, these questions I'm presenting, they're actually thinking about a lot of things. And ultimately, they actually said Jerry Rice. 70% said they would rather have Jerry Rice compared to a 30% in Deion Sanders. I can understand that. But when it came to value, when it came to somebody that they think that's more valuable than the other player, Deion Sanders won 60% to 40% of Jerry Rice. So the value of the player, like I said, I believe will be Deion. But if you look at the better player overall in the big picture, I would have to say Jerry Rice was the better player. I want to make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and click the subscription button below. Go ahead and click the like button. Please comment and see. What do you think? What do you think I can improve? Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys think that it's a lost cause? You can't really compare these two type of players because they were more of an old school type and they wouldn't really survive in this era? What do you guys actually think? So make sure you guys tune into the podcast, Competitive 24 Podcast. You can catch it on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or whatever you listen to your podcast. Go ahead and check out TrueWireMedia.com. Everything's in the description below. Make sure you click that and go ahead and subscribe. If you have any matchups that you might want to present to me, or vice versa, I just want to get it out there. So thank you for tuning in. This is Competitive Matchups, and this is your host Calvin Roberts, and I'm out.